12th of September 1943, Gran Sasso, Abruzzo, Kingdom of Italy. A high plateau, a shuttered mountain hotel, and a single cable car dangling over empty air. The stage was set long before the first glider touched stone. The canvas skins of the DFS 230s rattled like kettle drums in the thin wind. 9 men to a fuselage, knees locked, eyes shut, hands wide on webbing. A tow rope thrummed ahead of each glider like the string of a giant harp, and every bump in the slipstream spoke of risk more than of lift. The pilot said little. The Fallschirmjäger and the handful of Waffen-SS said even less. They were here to pluck a dictator off a mountaintop, and that sort of work did not welcome chatter. 2 months earlier, Italy had burst its seams. The Allies had come across Sicily, pressed onto the mainland, and left Rome guessing which way the hammer would fall. Within Mussolini's own court, the ground gave way. On 24th July 1943, the king told him what no one else dared. The war was lost, the army spent, the people done with him. Mussolini walked in as Il Duce and walked out under arrest, a patient bundled into an ambulance, destination undisclosed. Isolation was the point. Silence was the method. Erasure was the aim. Berlin did not accept erasure. Hitler took the news as a personal insult and a strategic wound. He wanted Rome seized, conspirators broken, and Mussolini found. That would take soldiers, aircraft, radios, and a willingness to gamble altitude against surprise. He summoned General Kurt Student, father of Germany's airborne arm, and gave him a simple charge. Find our ally. Bring him home. The codename was Eike, oak, solid, rooted, and stubborn. The task force swelled before it found its feet. Abwehrmen with notebooks, Brandenburgers with false papers, Luftwaffe specialists. And cutting across them all, Heinrich Himmler's ambitious wedge, SS Hauptsturmführer Otto Skorzeny, a broad-shouldered Viennese engineer with a dueling scar and an instinct for the lens. Skorzeny was ordered to assist, but he intended to star, and in that intention lay a second contest beneath the first. Credit is a currency in war, and some men spend more eagerly than they save. The initial search flailed. Mussolini vanished and reappeared in rumors. An island off Sardinia, said one lead. La Maddalena, insisted another. Skorzeny paid for a low reconnaissance with a ditching in the sea, which did nothing to dampen his appetite. A naval dash was plotted, then binned when the Italians shifted their prisoner inland. It was a shell game, but shells crack under pressure, and a wiretap run by SS Major Herbert Kappler in Rome caught a slip. Gran Sasso. A cable car. A hotel on a high bare plateau. Gran Sasso was not a place one wandered upon by chance. Student pushed staff work into hours, not days. Major Harold Moores took the lead. 3 options each sour. A ground assault meant a long climb or a long fight, both of which gave the guards time to shoot their prize. A parachute drop risked scattering men across ridges and ravines. That left the glider, silent, direct, and appallingly unforgiving of error. The plateau looked smooth in photographs. On the ground it was a stony anvil, and most sober men thought the landing arc a prayer rather than a plan. Moores drew a 2-part scheme. A road-bound force of roughly 250 men would secure the lower cable station at Asergi and cut interference. 10 gliders would strike the summit, seize the hotel, and spirit the prisoner down. 2 Fieseler Storch liaison aircraft waited as a hedge against disaster on the cable. It was audacious in the way of cliff paths. Workable if you kept your feet, fatal if you didn't. On 8th of September, the Italian government announced its armistice with the Allies. Rome bled authority overnight. Some units laid down arms, others hedged. A few fought. In the confusion, the rescue hardened from ambition into necessity. If the Italians decided to rid themselves of Mussolini to bargain for peace, there would be no second attempt. The window had shrunk to hours rather than days. Dawn of the 12th came late in truth. Allied bombers had savaged airfields and timetables. The gliders were delayed, the plan bent, and by a kink of timing and altitude, Skorzeny's Ket found itself leading the descent instead of following it. The first pilot banked hard. A breaking parachute snapped open like a white flower in thin air. The meadow rushed up, not a meadow at all, but a pitched, boulder-strewn shelf tilting toward a cliff's lip. The glider slammed in, slithered, and came to rest within a cricket pitch of the hotel veranda. Luck is a poor plan, but some days it is the only one you have. Inside the hotel, the Italian guard commander woke to noise that did not fit any drill. Outside, German troopers shook off whiplash and bile, checked their MP40s and ran. The Italians hesitated. Not cowards, just human, caught between orders to kill their ward and the thought of what German troops would do if they did. Scorzeny shouldered through the doorway after furniture barricades were pulled aside. 2 Italian officers stood with Mussolini, hands empty, faces pale. "Duce, the Führer has sent me," Scorzeny said. "You are free." Mussolini, who knew the mathematics of power as well as any man, replied without a blink. "I knew Adolf would not abandon me." There is vanity in such lines, but also clarity. Above the plateau, more gliders corkscrewed in. Below, Morse's column forced the cable station and took it largely intact after a brief crackle of fire. The 2 halves of the plan had touched at last, and the one thing everyone now needed was a way down before the mountain remembered how to kill men. The Storch landed on a hummock of level earth that hardly deserved the name of runway. The first one broke a leg. The second arrived in a wheeze of dust, and the pilot, Captain Heinrich Gerlach, judged the field and shook his head. 2 men, perhaps, and no more. He was overruled by circumstance and by Scorzeny's presence. Benito Mussolini and Otto Scorzeny squeezed aboard. Fallschirmjäger braced the wingtips. The engine screamed. The wheels hammered rock and scrub. The edge came on like a guillotine. For a heartbeat, the Storch fell into the void, and then, with the long-legged grace that made the type famous, clawed itself into lift and slid down the valley like a hawk cut loose from a glove. In a war of steel and mass, this was a rescue on the scale of a man's breath. It ended at Pratica di Mare, then Vienna, then Berlin's newsreels. But rescues have authors and editors, and those are not always the same men. That contest was only starting. Rome, late July to early September 1943. The curtain fell in the capital, and the first act of the rescue was, in truth, the story of a nation changing sides while trying not to be. Crushed between giants, Mussolini's arrest was velvet and iron. The king used courtesy and rank to remove a dictator whose regime had been fused with the state for 2 decades. The Carabinieri did the rest with clean professionalism, moving him from site to site to avoid German detection and domestic unrest. It was neat work, and it bought time for a government that believed time would bring Allied mercy. It also provoked a German counter-system, radio taps, informants, aerial patrols, naval plans, and, when all else failed, guesswork with teeth. Student ran his hunt like an airborne operation because that is what he knew. Reconnaissance, deception, rehearsals in the head rather than the field. He gave Morse a day to plan because the war did not grant a second. The cable car line to Campo Imperatore became the hinge in his mind. Hold the lower station, and you deny Italian reinforcements. Seize the upper and you choke the garrison's nerve. It was not elegant, but it was honest. The composition of the raiding party mattered. The Fallschirmjäger brought bitter experience from Crete and the Eastern Front. A coolness that comes from failure survived. The SS detachment brought appetite and a talent for publicity. That mixture is combustible in any army. Student intended Scorzeny to stand by Mussolini once found, not to lead the assault. Scorzeny intended to be in the first glider, because photographs do not recognize staff diagrams. The friction was quiet before the jump and thunderous afterward, which is often the way of these things. On the Italian side, the guard at the hotel was competent, not fanatical. They belonged to a country that had just executed a swerve in policy and asked its soldiers to hold both the old oath and the new promise. Some men can do that. Most cannot. Their orders were ambiguous by design. Do not let him fall into German hands. Do not provoke a German massacre. Hold your post. Think of Rome. Think of your family. Think. That is a cruel instruction to arm with a rifle. The geography punished indecision. Gran Sasso is not a castle. It is a roof. The plateau sits near 7,000 feet, exposed to gusts and glare, and the hotel itself, built as a ski resort, faces a slope as deceptive as a green baize table. A glider will roll where a man can stand, but it will not always stop where a plan suggests. The aerial photographs were honest liars. They hid rocks beneath textureless light. Men discovered the truth with their teeth. The morning went wrong on schedule. Allied raids had rattled air crews, cratered runways, and thrown off timings. The first three-glider element, slated to lead, looped to gain height over Tivoli's ridges. The second element pushed on, and in that small misalignment, Skorzeni's chalk found itself nose-on to the target and obliged to act. Lieutenant Meyer, at the controls, flew his circuit under cloud and made the kind of landing that empties a man's stomach and fills his logbook. His account is pilot's prose: brakes, parachute, barbed wire wrapped on the skid like string, 40 meters to spare. Skorzeni's memoir is theater: knife-slashing canvas for a view, a ski jump of a meadow, a shouted order to crash as near as possible to the hotel, 15 meters to spare. Between those versions lies a simple truth: they came in far too hot, and yet they arrived. Berlepsch's men landed cleanly minutes later. Discipline reasserted itself. Teams fanned to the upper cable house, the lobby, the stairwell, the perimeter. Radios crackled, mission complete within a quarter of an hour. No German fired in the hotel. 2 Italians died far below at the lower station. It was a surgical event wrapped in a larger collapse, and its success owed as much to timing and Italian paralysis as to German nerve. That does not lessen the nerve, but it frames it properly. The extraction was improvised under pressure. The cable line, damaged in the valley fight, was unusable. The first Storch bent a leg on touchdown, a reminder that mountains give only narrow margins. The second, with Gerlach at the stick, made the book example: nose into wind, lighten the load, trust the high lift slats, and pray.
He objected to carrying Skorzeny, and he was right on the numbers.
He carried him anyway, which is what happens when rank, ego, and mission meet in a small cockpit. The takeoff was a seesaw with gravity, and luck sat heavy on their side of the plank. By late afternoon, Mussolini was in Vienna, a guest of a war that had already consumed his country's future. Hitler's congratulations were prompt, as were Goebbels's cameras. Himmler's machine spun the story tight around one man's shoulders. Student's airborne arm was framed as supporting cast. This was not accidental. It was not entirely fair, and it is why the argument about who won Gran Sasso has lasted longer than most arguments about rocks. What matters tactically is that a mixed German force executed a precision glider landing at altitude, achieved surprise, and removed a high-value captive without a firefight at the objective. What matters strategically is murkier. A rescued Mussolini was not the same thing as a restored Italy, and a puppet regime in the north could not reverse the tide. Yet for Berlin it offered a story at a dark moment, and sometimes stories are what governments buy when victories are too dear. Campo Imperatore Hotel, 12th of September 1943. The corridor outside room 201 smelled of old wood and boot polish. War is often made in places that were once meant for holidays. The assault inside the building was less a charge than a walk with pistols drawn. The Italian officers in the room with Mussolini did not reach for their holsters because they were thinking 3 moves ahead, and every move ended in German bullets. Mussolini himself was pale but composed. He was also heavier than photographs showed, the years having taken their toll. The men who would carry him down the stairs noticed that before they noticed anything else. Human details intrude even in neat operations. Orders had been issued to the German assault not to fire unless fired upon. That restraint surprisingly held. One reason was practical. Ricochets in corridors are not fussy about uniforms. Another was political. Student and Moors knew that a massacre would spoil the propaganda. Skorzeny understood, perhaps more keenly, that the camera loves clean scenes. Thus the image that would circle Europe, Skorzeny escorting Il Duce onto the terrace, arms linked, both men half smiling, was born of a dozen quiet choices not to pull triggers. Small decisions can make memory. Down in a Sergi, the picture was far noisier. Moore's advance pushed through checkpoints manned by carabinieri, who had no wish to die on an afternoon no longer tied to a cause. There were shots, a few bodies, many surrenders. The lower station fell. The cable was damaged in the skirmish, a minor detail at the time that had major consequences above. Men looking up at steel lines rarely think about bearings and legs. But operations live or die by such simple parts. Inside the hotel lobby, confusion peaked when a handful of off-duty Italian guards, hearing the commotion, did exactly what civilians do. They went to ground in their rooms and waited for someone else to decide their fate. The commander's shout, "Don't shoot!" fell somewhere between good sense and resignation. He was not a traitor. He was a man out of time. Skorzeny reached the room, spoke his line, and tilted the day's narrative in his favor. Berlepsch arrived with the Fallschirmjäger minutes later and did the more boring work of securing stairwells, radios, and the parapet. The SS had the better photographs. The paratroopers had the better map. Both were necessary, but only one sells newspapers. Mussolini looked out across the plateau once more as if fixing it in his mind. He was a pilot, and the Storch that snub-nosed onto the grass would have tugged at old instincts. He knew the performance numbers and did not like the look of the field. He still climbed in because that is what prisoners do when offered a door. The pilot glared at Skorzeny and tried logic. Logic rarely wins on a day already decided by daring. On takeoff, the Storch stunned even men who did not scare easily. It leapt, sagged, kissed earth with a wheel, and then sailed into a valley that seemed built to swallow small aeroplanes. In that handful of seconds, the mission passed the point where bullets and bravery matter, and belonged to lift coefficients and the whim of wind. The machine did its work. The pilot did his. Sometimes that is all you can ask. Back at Pratica di Mare, the operation became paperwork and petrol. A Heinkel carried Mussolini north, where he would become the face of the Italian Social Republic, a state born old and doomed by the geography of retreat. The German newsreels turned the day into a fable of elite soldiers and loyalty repaid. Winston Churchill, who knew the weight of a well-timed deed, told Parliament that it was a stroke of great daring carried out with heavy force. Praise, framed correctly, hurts no one, but there were aftershocks. The rescue stiffened German resolve in central and northern Italy and accelerated the disarming of Italian units who might otherwise have waited. It encouraged Himmler's SS to claim a larger slice of special operations, a field that thrives on risk and credit. And it taught every staff officer in Europe the same lesson. Never assume a prisoner is beyond reach if a glider can find a shelf of mountain to sit on. Berlin, Rastenburg, and the propaganda mills. Late September 1943. The rescue became story as quickly as it had been planned. And stories have owners, whether or not they have authors. Goebbels understood tempo. Within days, photographs of Skorzeny leading Mussolini from the hotel, of gliders angled like arrows on bald rock, and of Fallschirmjäger grinning through dust were on screens from Oslo to Athens. The SS captain's name, exotic and easy on the tongue, found headlines. Students did not. Moores, who wrote the plan and commanded the ground arm, became a footnote. Berlepsch, who landed the assault wave cleanly and on time, sank beneath the surface of public awareness altogether. This is not unique to Germany. It is how public memory usually works, and it works the same everywhere. Inside the Wehrmacht, there was a colder calculation. The airborne arm had achieved something tactically exacting. The SS had secured the political capital. Himmler's lesson was clear. Special action must never lie outside his empire again. For student and for the Fallschirmjäger, the lesson was to keep doing the hard things while others did the easy telling. They had learned that before. Crete had taught them that cruelty. In Italy, the effect was mixed. For the new Badoglio government, the rescue proved that no promise to the Allies could wholly insulate them from German reach. For the partisans beginning to find their feet, it hardened the sense that the coming fight would be a long one, cut village by village, ridge by ridge. For Italian soldiers in uniform on 13th of September, it offered a simple message: follow German orders or clear the barracks. Many chose home. Some chose the mountains. A few chose the black uniforms of the Social Republic. None chose comfort with clear eyes. Mussolini himself was given a second act he could not play. He spoke from Verona, not Rome. He commanded only where German battalions shaded his orders. The old cadence was there, but the audience had thinned, and history rarely offers encores without cost. He would end 2 years later on a northern road, his body a message on a lamppost. Rescues cannot repair legitimacy once it has snapped. From the Allied side, the lesson was operational rather than sentimental. If gliders could land on Gran Sasso, they could land on any shelf with a windbreak and a line of sight. British and American planners watched the film, read the reports, and took notes. The idea of using airborne precision against hardened points took on a freshness that would be seen again in France and the Low Countries. Even a rival's daring can sharpen your own blade. There is also the timeless question of ethics in such raids. The men who flew and ran carried emblems that, elsewhere, marked them as instruments of a regime responsible for horrors. They also executed a clean professional action against a military objective with restraint rare in that year. Both truths sit side by side. History does not tidy them for us. We are left to recognize skill while refusing to sanitize the cause that employed it. Tactics on a thin line. Why Gran Sasso worked at all. It is worth laying out the bare mechanics, because success without understanding breeds myth. First, intelligence. The wiretaps mattered. Without Kapler's recordings and the cross-checks, seaplane at Lake Bracciano, unusual traffic at the cable, increased security at an Alpine hotel, the plan is blind. Raw information is not intelligence until it is corroborated. Here it was, second timing. The delay that put Skorzeni's glider in front could have ruined the assault. It serendipitously accelerated the shock at the door. In the valley, Moore's column arrived close enough in time to secure the cable house and deny interference. 2 hands struck one bell.
You don't teach that in a classroom.
You arrange the possibility and accept the risk. Third, the machine. The DFS-230 was a humble craft, but it was built for this. 9 men, a short run, and the tolerance to smash into rough earth without splintering like a toy. The Storch, with its slats and flaps, was one of the few aeroplanes in any air force that could attempt that takeoff at that height, on that surface, with that load, and survive. Tools matter, especially unfashionable ones. Fourth, the human element, restraint. Not firing inside the hotel was not merely humane. It was tactical sense. It preserved the hostage, prevented a ricochet killing the objective, and froze the Italians in the narrow space between fear and duty. Few operations punish a premature shot as quickly as a hostage rescue, and this was a hostage rescue wrapped in a coup de théâtre. Fifth, narrative discipline. Radios sent only what they must. Pictures were staged after the fact, rather than during the breach. Units stuck to roles despite the temptation to freelance. On another day, that discipline breaks, and the plateau becomes a killing ground with no helicopter to lift the wounded. There were no helicopters in 1943. There were only postcards and graves. Finally, luck. The wind could have swung. A wheel could have snapped. An Italian lieutenant could have closed his hand on a pistol and muddied every corridor with lead. Luck is not a plan, but it is a component, and wise commanders leave a gap in the blueprint the size of fortune and call it margin. Epilogue, with the dust settled and the film finished. 1945 would prove that rescues restore bodies, not causes. Otto Skorzeny rode Gran Sasso to a career in legend. He would go on to devise other raids, to slip behind lines in American uniforms during the Ardennes, to stand in the dock and walk free, to fade into a life of exile and consulting and myth. He was good at what cameras reward. He was also a competent field leader whose men trusted his nerve. Both can be true without blessing all he served. Kurt Student returned to building what the war kept breaking. An airborne arm used sometimes as a rapier and too often as a hammer. He never made peace with how the story was told, but he knew the ledger that matters among soldiers is written in competence, not in headlines. Harold Moores and Georg von Berlepsch, names known to specialists and barely to the public, had done what professionals do, plan, execute, hand over, and move on. The war offered them no statues. It seldom does. For Italy, Gran Sasso became a paragraph in a longer tale of occupation, civil war, and liberation. Partisans took towns in the hills and lost them. German columns ringed forests and burned farms. Allied divisions climbed the spine of the peninsula in winter and left their dead in mountain soil. The hotel, a toy of the 1930s, stood empty in later years, a weather-beaten witness to a day when noise and silence exchanged places. Buildings remember, even if we pretend they do not. And what of the viewer now, listening in a warm room to cold air described? Perhaps this: that daring is a renewable resource, and it is not owned by virtue or vice. The mechanics of courage and of craft can be admired even when the flag on the sleeve repels. A precise raid, cleanly done, remains a precise raid. It does not launder the uniform. It reminds us that war is made by people, particular and fallible, who sometimes do extraordinary things for causes we reject. The gliders on Gran Sasso make a fine picture from above. White triangles scattered like gulls on grey stone. From the cockpit they are sweat and grit and a decision made 10 seconds too late or too soon. From the corridor of room 201, they are a knock at a door and a sentence that releases one man to a final act he could not carry. From the valley, they are the hum of a storch clawing into air it has no right to master. From history's distance, they are all of these at once. We close where we began. 12 of September, 1943, in a thin wind on a high roof of Italy. The war would not end for another 20 months. The rescue would be told for 80 years. And if you listen closely at that hotel on a quiet day, the breeze through broken shutters still sounds a little like canvas under strain, which is as good a reminder as any that some stories hang by threads we cannot see until they are pulled.